Welcome to the Wage Enhancement Grant Funding and Workforce Compensation Funding session. The goal of this workshop is to help childcare administrators and financial managers understand the process of calculating the Wage Enhancement Grant and Workforce Compensation Funding using a calculator tool. Knowing how the funding processes work can help to accurately allocate the Wage Enhancement Grant and Workforce Compensation Funding. Today, we will be covering several important topics. We will briefly review wage enhancement grant and workforce compensation funding. We'll talk about how the order of operations for the calculations go, review the calculator tool and how it works by going through an example and reviewing the outputs provided. We'll look over an available option for reporting for 6 to 12. We will discuss some limitations of the tool. WEG is designed to help close the wage gap between registered early childhood educators, RECEs, who work in education sector programs and those working in licensed childcare settings. It also aims to stabilize the childcare workforce by supporting and retaining registered early childhood educators. Eligible licensed childcare program staff and home visitors can receive an increase of up to $2 per hour. Providers will also receive an additional 17.5% for mandatory benefits. The funding allows child care providers to increase staff wages while keeping child care affordable for families. This helps in recruiting and retaining qualified staff, ensuring better care and education for children. Workforce compensation funding is designed to provide better compensation for eligible registered early childhood educators working in licensed childcare programs. This helps to stabilize the workforce and ensure high quality care for children. Workforce compensation funding includes annual increase funding, which provides an annual wage increase for eligible RECEs, wage floor funding, which ensures a minimum wage level for RECEs working in licensed childcare settings, and minimum wage offset funding, which supports licensees for non-RECE staff to offset increases in the minimum wage. RECEs and licensed childcare programs who earn below a certain wage threshold are eligible for this funding. Specific eligibility criteria and application processes are outlined in the funding guidelines. The funding process for WEG and workforce compensation. For staff serving children aged 0 to 5, it is included in the cost-based funding amounts issued. There is no more application process. Children's Services is paying out an estimated amount based on 2024 application values for staff serving children aged 6 to 12. Providers are still required to allocate funding to staff based on eligibility. Providers will still need to apply for staff in their 6+ programs in 2025. More information will be communicated at a later date. Looking at the order of operations from a high level, you'd begin with a staff's base wage, then add WEG, then add QUELC annual increase, and finally add wage floor if applicable. First, determine the base wage. This is the wage set out by the employer and includes any employer-based wage improvements such as obligations from collective agreements and minimum wage increases. Note, this should be inclusive of general operating or GO funding. After determining the base wage, apply WEG funding up to $2 an hour for a maximum of $32.81 per hour in 2025. Then apply QUELC annual increase of up to $3 per hour in 2025 up to the wage ceiling, which is $27 for RECE program staff and $30 for RECE supervisors and home visitors per hour in 2025. Finally, if applicable, apply QUELC wage floor funding to bring staff up to the wage floor amount. $24.86 for RECE program staff and $25.86 for RECE supervisors and home visitors per hour in 2025. And now we will take a look at the calculator tool and walk through each section of the sheet. It's important that you review the disclaimer tab and understand the terms of use. The wage enhancement calculator tool is designed for illustration purposes and to assist the recipient in estimating the appropriate amount of wage enhancement and workforce compensation funding to allocate to their staff. However, it is not intended to be legally or financially binding, and the results generated by the tool are not guaranteed by the city. So I'll begin working through the tool from the top down. You can begin entering your agency name here and a site name below if you're working with multiple sites. This section here is designed to help track the amounts that you've spent and would have remaining for staff serving 6 to 12. As we know, 0 to 5 is part of the cost-based funding allocation. You would get these amounts for your adjustment letter in 2025. So for our example, I'm going to put 20,000 received and 1,500 in supplemental grant, 15,000 for annual increase, and 15,000 for wage floor received. You'll see here that it shows the remaining amounts for WEG and supplemental grant, for annual increase, and for wage floor. As you complete your payroll by pay periods, you can enter the amount that was paid out in these sections here, and it will show you how much is remaining. So I'll put 1,200 and 1,200. So as you fill in these sections throughout the year, this amount will get lowered and you'll see how much you have remaining to pay your staff. For supplemental grant, it's typically used for salaries and benefits. So if you've used it all on salaries and benefits, you would enter it here. Other would be if you're using it for things such as additional health benefits once all your mandatory benefits have been covered. This section here is for benefits paid. Employer benefit component is above, followed by the employee benefit below. For today's example, I'm going to use the figures that we have here in the example. You would use your own amounts that you pay based on what determinations you have on these sections. So for CPP, we're going to use 5.45, EI, WSIB, and EHT. Vacation pay of 4% and public holiday pay 3.51, which totals 17.5. It's important that you fill in this section. Otherwise, the employee and employer benefit components will not calculate in the tool. And then this section here is where you would put in your employee information. I'll label them staff 1, staff 2, etc., but you would use your employees' names or whatever identifier you want to use for them. So we'll start with staff 1. We'll say that they are an RECE program staff who earns $20 an hour, and they have worked 80 hours in this pay period, and all of that time was in an eligible position. So you'll see here that they're fully eligible for $2 an hour in WEG, which works out to $160 to be added onto their pay. These sections here are the employee benefit component and the employer benefit component. The employee benefit component is calculated from this section here, so vacation pay and public holiday pay. Employer benefit component is from this top section here, and these are all of the amounts that need to be remitted on behalf of the employee. Total benefits, $28, so the total employee compensation is $172.02, and the total compensation that the provider is required to cover is $188. So this would be for that employee in the pay period. Next, we look at annual increase and wage floor. This section shows whether the employee is eligible in terms of whether or not they are an RECE staff. So if they're not an RECE, it will show ineligible. If they are, it shows eligible. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're eligible for the full amount of funding, just that they are in a position that's eligible for that funding. So again, this shows the eligibility rate for annual increase of the full $3 an hour. Salary component 240, employee benefit component $18.02, employer benefit $23.98, total benefits is 42, and the amount to be remitted to the employee would be 258.02, and the total compensation for the provider is 282. Now there's nothing in the wage floor amount here because this staff is now over the wage floor amount. When you begin with $20 and add 2, we're up to 22, plus an additional $3 brings it up to a total of $25 an hour, which is above the wage floor amount, so no wage floor funding would be issued. I will go through another example where we will see wage floor funding issued. So again, we'll select REC program staff. This time we'll put a base hourly wage of $18 an hour, 80 hours, and all of it in an eligible position. Exact same determination for wage enhancement, exact same determination for annual increase, the full $2 and $3. But now they are $1.86 below the wage floor. So we have to provide $1.86 to bring them up to that amount. And you'll see the employee benefit, employer benefits, and total employee compensation and total compensation here. We'll provide an example now of non-REC program staff earning $20 an hour, working 80 hours in that pay period, all of it in an eligible position. So similarly, you'll see the full $2 an hour in WEG. However, they are not eligible for workforce compensation funding as they are not an REC staff. So that section will just end up being blank. Finally, we'll look at a supervisor, an REC supervisor earning $21 an hour, also working 80 hours in a pay period. They get the same $2 an hour in WEG, $3 an hour in annual increase, along with the benefits being calculated, and no wage floor as that total brings them over the wage floor amount. So I'll provide an example as well of a home visitor that would qualify for wage floor funding. So we'll pick REC home visitor. Supervisor and home visitors both have the same cap, so it would apply equally for supervisors and home visitors. If they were earning $19 an hour, working 80 hours, all in an eligible position, they'd be eligible for the full $2 an hour in WEG, $3 annual increase, and again, $1.86 to bring them up to the home visitor wage floor of $25.86 and the total compensation for each of those sections. I will also give an example of a non-program staff or supervisor. So either this may be a cook or a bookkeeper or admin staff, and we'll say that they're earning $20 an hour. They're working 80 hours. However, to be in an eligible position, they have to be providing care to children. So let's say that in this position, they spend 25% of their time providing care to children. So it'll still give the $2 an hour, but it's based on 25% of 80, which would be 20 hours. So they'd be getting $40 an hour total in WEG funding, and they're not eligible for workforce compensation as they're not an REC program staff, supervisor, or home visitor. And then here you can see the summary, which gives the total WEG compensation for all of the staff entered, total annual increase compensation, and total wage floor compensation. You can plug these amounts into this payment summary here. I'll do that now so you can see again how it works. So 987 for WEG, and you'll see the remaining amount drops. Annual increase of 1128, and you'll see that amount drops as well. And finally, wage floor 349.68 to give the remaining total. Before we close off, I just wanted to let you know about some of the limitations of this tool. You have to be careful with inputting wages and make sure that you are above the minimum wage. For this tool, we have allowed for anything above the student minimum wage, which is $16.20 in 2025. So you can enter $16.20. You cannot enter $16.19. However, be aware that minimum wage for non-students is $17.20. So just be careful that you don't enter something lower than 1720 if they're not a student. And finally, this is an Excel sheet. It's very easy to accidentally manipulate it and drag a cell like that, which will break the sheet and cause reference errors. And in the off chance that you do see an error message, you will have to close the program and start fresh using the original document that was sent out in the email. If you want to save the document on your computer for regular access, you will need to be sure it's saved as a .xlsx format in order to make sure that the formulas are working properly. And that's how the tool works. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us at childrenservices@ottawa.ca.